Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to the Wild Vaughn Manor, where Roger and I have returned. We've returned for the Book of the Week. The Book of the Week, that thrill-packed program where Roger and I will just pick up some book that's lying around here at the manor and talk about it. And today we're talking about a really awesome book. We're talking about this one. This is the Louis L'Amour Companion. It's the Louis L'Amour Companion, which is fantastic if you love Louis L'Amour like I do and Roger does, and so many people did at one time, and hopefully still do. Louis L'Amour, who was the greatest Western writer of all time. This is not in dispute. This is a fact. He was the greatest Western writer of all time, who wrote Westerns and other action-packed types of stories back in the pulp era and then throughout the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and into the 80s. And sadly passed away in 1988. I think he was 80 years old at the time. And this book came out in the early 90s. This is put together by Robert Weinberg, and it's packed full of information about Louis L'Amour and Louis L'Amour's work. And so if you love his stuff, this book is just fantastic. So Louis L'Amour, I don't even know how many books he wrote. It says in here. But he wrote a ton, man. He wrote a ton. And when I was growing up, he was just one of those writers who always had a new book out every year, or even more often than that. My grandfather was a huge Louis L'Amour fan. I became a big Louis L'Amour fan. Louis L'Amour is up there, among my favorite writers. He was great. He was great, Louis L'Amour. And this book is just packed full of cool stuff. A lot of biographical information in this book. A lot of bibliographical information in this book. It's full of greatness, this book. Oh, it also has, this is a mass market paperback, of course. Back in the olden days, every book pretty much came out in mass market paperback. And so this has some photos in the middle of it. Like here's a picture of Louis L'Amour there. And of course, where the photos are, the spine is broken because that always happens if you put photos in the middle of a mass market paperback book. The spine will break, but we get some cool photographs of some of his old magazine work. Western, there he is there. Looking just like you would expect Louis L'Amour to look. But this book is full of different articles and stories and interviews. There are a lot of great interviews and biographical information in here. We have some little pieces written by people who knew Louis L'Amour. Like this one, I will read just a little bit of this one here. This one little paragraph. Louis L'Amour was the kind heart of America, the walking, talking, smiling, and storytelling best of what we like to think we really are. Long after the Olympian virtues about which Louis wrote had been traded in the flea markets of Wall Street, Madison Avenue, the Pentagon, and Hollywood, traded for cultural egomania, dissembling me-firstism, and Ollie North-style phony patriotism, the rangy cowboy from Jamestown, North Dakota, remained a speaker for courage, ethic, friendship, craft, and independence. You know what Louis had? He had wisdom. Not the seat of the pants common sense, but genuine wisdom, inspired by kindness. Louis was always the model of our better self. That was written by Louis L'Amour's friend, Harlan Ellison, who knew and loved Louis L'Amour like so many people did. And he really did seem to be a pretty decent guy, Louis L'Amour. And like I said, he wrote a lot of fantastic stuff. And if you want to know about all the stuff that he wrote, and he wrote so much, this is a great book to have. It'll answer some questions you might have if you're really interested in the author, like when did he write which book? He has so many books that, it's hard to know at what point in his career sometimes he wrote the books and in what order. And, he was his most famous series of books are the Sackett novels, and he did not write those in order. The publication order on those is different than the order that they take place chronologically. So it's kind of interesting to know when he wrote those books. Jubal Sackett was, I think, an earlier book in the series, but it's, I think, the last book that he wrote, for example. You can find all that stuff out in here. Going to the contents page, we have all kinds of stuff. The first part of this book is his life and times, so all kinds of biographical information, little pieces by different people. And we also have selected letters in here. We have the second part here after that, because he got there's all kinds of stuff in here in the biographical section, as you could see. Some written by Weinberg, some written by other people. We got a chronology of his life and a lot of stuff like that. Then we got part 2, before the novels, which is kind of the pulp era, when he was writing short stories for the pulps. And that's really, really interesting. We have a section on Louis L'Amour's poetry. We have a really interesting interview with Louis L'Amour about writing during the pulp era, which is really interesting stuff. We have a lot of pretty cool interviews in here with Louis L'Amour, where he gives you all kinds of information, which I don't think is available anyplace else. And then we have part 3, the novelist. And that's really cool because there's all kinds of information about what he wrote when. We have, we've got this part, Hondo, novel or novelization. Was Hondo a novel or novelization of the film? We have a section here that's just random in here called the 25 best Western novels of all time. That's interesting. I'll talk about that all on its own one day in a video. Most of those I haven't read. But here we have the novels of Louis L'Amour, the 60s. We've got the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and 80s in here, where it gives you all the information on the different novels and when he wrote them, little bits about the writing of each book. It's just really fascinating. And of course, the 80s, the last decade that he wrote. And the last book in here, it's listed as number 90 in here. So 90 novels, that seems like a lot. The Haunted Mesa, which was published in hardcover by Bantam Books in 1987, which was a really strange book, The Haunted Mesa. But yeah, he wrote so much and it was all so awesome. Louis L'Amour is not nearly as popular now as he used to be. I remember he was one of the most popular novelists and writers up until he passed away in the 1980s. If you wanted to read a good Western, well, Louis L'Amour was the guy, just like Stephen King was the guy for horror. But, the popularity of the Western was already diminishing pretty seriously in the 1980s. And there were a lot of people who would read Louis L'Amour Westerns who wouldn't read any other Westerns written by anybody else. And after he passed away, the Western just pretty much plummeted in popularity for the most part. And I don't know how often Louis L'Amour is read anymore. But I, of course, highly recommend him. His books are so much fun. Really, really good action-adventure types of books. They're awesome for what they are. And this is just fantastic, a fantastic thing to have. Easily, you could find this pretty easily, I believe, probably on eBay or in other places if you're interested. And I do highly recommend it. It's awesome. Okay, Roger, I guess that's all we have to say for today. I will catch you next time.